That was a kamikaze pass. Saturday, November 15th. It is about 6:15 a.m. Jake is in Jake's bed where Jake's been all night since bedtime last night at what time? 11:30, and at that time, Jake and I went to bed in Jake's bedroom here after playing Rummy. After getting home last night about 10:25 p.m., Jake and I had no contact with anyone on this street yesterday at all, except for Roland. I had no contact with anyone except Roland. Jake had no contact with anyone but me on this street, and I had no contact with anyone on this street but Roland. I have never been invited to participate in any form of investigation or matter that would involve me and my son Jacob. I've never waived my constitutional rights, and I have never appointed anyone to act as my representative and receive invitations to participate or testify in any matter that would involve me and my son, or to engage in financial transactions, or to make or receive phone calls that my son and I should hear, or electronic messages that are deemed necessary for me and my son to be made aware of in order to participate or testify. And I've never waived my constitutional rights to allow anyone else to make those decisions as to whether or not anyone else can act as my representative in any manner whatsoever. I have never had any contact with a woman who lives in the downstairs apartment, drives a blue SUV, or any of her visitors. Jacob has never had any contact with that woman. I've never had a single conversation with her or spoken to her. Jake and I have never had a single conversation with Pat or Ronnie, who live on the second floor next door, or any of their visitors. And Jake and I have never had a single conversation with Fred, who lives on the ground floor next door, or any visitors to that apartment on the ground floor next door. Jake has never had a single conversation with Shantae, who lives on the ground floor next door, or any of her visitors. And the last time I spoke to Shantae was January 2014, when I banned her from coming to this apartment or ever approaching me and my son due to her lascivious behavior, attempts to seduce me and my son, and obvious delusional state of mind in which she appeared to be engaged in trench coat warfare games, which I have seen other people that I've already mentioned engage in, which is delusional to do, and would be ridiculous to invite anybody on this street except for me and Jake to participate in any manner that would involve me and Jake, because nobody on this street except for Roland ever has any contact with me and Jake. And I have begged Roland to tell me and to invite me, and Roland refuses to, and calls me crazy, says I'm crazy, and won't allow me to participate in the obvious matter, which I have no knowledge who the person is behind that, or the police officer responsible for conducting such investigation or matter that involves me and my son. But nobody ever spends a dime on me and Jake but me, ever. And if I had any money, I certainly wouldn't give it to people I don't know or never have any contact with to spend, and I don't approve purchases by anyone except for me that I make, and I don't buy anything that I don't list on my Facebook page, and I never buy alcohol or drugs. I've never done drugs a day in my life, and neither has Jacob, and I'm not a pedophile. So there's not too many more ways to say that. I have never consented to searches, surveillance, monitoring, or supervision. I've never received supervision, and I'm the only person that ever supervises me and my son. It would be delusional to assert that someone is controlling me and my son and has supervisory control of me and my son, given the fact that that individual has never supervised me and my son. And you cannot supervise someone without their knowledge and having contact with them. I've been a teacher and worked in the field of education Altogether, I have 11 years of experience in the field of education. I have never been able to supervise a child that I didn't actually communicate with and have contact with, because that child would have no knowledge of my instruction and guidance. He might be able to surmise some of my instructions, but, nobody's a mind reader, and even if the child could surmise some things from, suggested sounds or papers left behind on a desk, without any type of written or oral instruction given directly to the child, there's no way the child could comply with the requirements of supervision. And, that's just obvious, isn't it? On top of that, I don't believe that anybody could ever say that they have supervisory control over someone just because they spy on them. Only a pedophile spies on a child. We have consensual monitoring laws that have to be followed in this country. In addition, there is a requirement for a mandatory reporting if you believe a child is in danger of being abused. That is to be handled directly through the authorities who report it to a judge, who will make a determination whether or not that child is in danger. We don't just sit back and spy on children or their parents because we think they might be abused. Even if you're spying on them and using manner of surveillance and monitoring with electronic equipment to surveil the child and the suspected abuser, what are you going to do? Sit back and listen to it while it's happening? If I went over to my son right now and started beating him, the bitch in the apartment downstairs that's obviously surveilling me and my son, and obvious also that my neighbors are aware of that and listening to that information, which I believe is probably being done by a cell phone. And I have actually found speakers in my walls, and when like a trailer that we used to live in, there was a speaker. My landlord pulled it out of the wall after I moved out. He didn't know that I saw him, and I found it on the side of the road with the pieces of board that he took out of the trailer to get to the speaker to take it out. So I've been through these games before these people on this street ever knew my name, or before this Shreveport police officer ever knew my name. It's been many years. We don't sit back and listen and watch while a child is at risk and in danger of being abused, because why? I could go over to my son right now and put a baseball bat through his skull. And it'd be great, wouldn't it, for somebody to be able to say, gee, we got it, here's our tape, we can prove it. He would still be dead, wouldn't he? Why? Because that's not preventing any type of abuse from occurring. If that was true and there was reason to surveil me because I'm suspected of being an abuser, that would only be endangering the child, right? That's endangerment. You have probable cause to believe that a child is likely to be abused and should be surveilled. Then you are aware of a situation in which a child is endangered, in which mandatory reporting requires all law enforcement officers, school teachers, which that includes me. I've been trained on mandatory reporting myself by the head of the counseling department for Caddo Parish Schools, who was my college professor when I was working on my teacher certification classes. So if I'm doing anything that justifies any type of monitoring, then the police officer and the informants conducting such monitoring would, in fact, have to be charged as an accessory for sitting back and taking the time to install audio and video, or just, I think it's just audio equipment for the purpose that they're justifying. And I know they're justifying it for that reason, because there's a nurse that works for the Shreveport Police Department and told me that the detective she works for is nuts, and she sits back and monitors people's surveillance. And she said death threats and people scream and yell at her and threaten her and stuff like that. But she's been trained to do it according to the Department of Justice guidelines. I talked to her about it. She had her training, her field training, and classroom training in Dallas, Texas, and it took several weeks. I think 8 weeks is what it took. 8 weeks. And she's a disabled RN. So they do have people in Shreveport that work for the police department. They do know the regulations and do follow Department of Justice guidelines and do work directly under the supervision of a detective investigating. And she told me that, I said, gee, why would you ever want to surveil somebody or monitor them? She said, oh, drug traffickers, drug dealers, prostitution rings, people that are suspected of abusing their children. And she said that with such emphasis in people who might be abusing in case they might abuse their children. She was saying that to let me know that that's what was being done to me. And I used to see her all the time, and she used to appear every place that I went. And I knew why. It was probably because she wanted to try and say that she was surveilling me and Jake. Or else she was just there because she wanted to talk to me for some reason. So I talked to her, she told me the detective she works for is nuts. So, there is no reason to surveil a child. The only reason anybody would do that is to be voyeuristic, to monitor a child, to see what they do, stalking the child, and voyeurism of the child and their parents. That's the only reason. If I'm consenting to all this and agreeing to it and don't care and voluntarily allowing this police officer who I've never met and don't know, and all these informants who I don't know and have never met, to do this to me and my son, then why would you need to surveil me anyway if I'm all agreeing to all of it? Because why? You need to prove that it's true. There's no reason to do that. And why would you be documenting things like that through the surveillance and doing surveillance to begin with if it's all being consented to? That is proof in itself of an adversarial relationship between me and the police officer and the police officer's informants, just because of doing that. But I know that the police here know what they're required to do in order to monitor someone, using civilians to conduct surveillance to say that they had a good reason just in case something might happen because they think I might be a drug dealer or this or that and the other. If there is any danger to my child, then that should have been reported directly to a child abuse police officer who would have taken any reasonable suspicion and would be required to take that reasonable suspicion to a judge who would make the determination whether or not my son was in danger and then would take action, which would include, and I know this because I know the guy that used to do this, had a master's degree in counseling, was a licensed professional counselor, many years of experience working with children, who took the phone calls for endangerment, who took the hotline calls, or he actually staffed the office for Department of Social Services that took those calls. And he didn't answer the phones, but the women who answered the phones and men who answered those phones and took those endangerment calls reported to him what those issues were on the hotline. And he was the one who determined whether or not there was a reason to dispatch a field investigator from Child Protective Services to investigate the matter. And if he deemed it to be substantiated, then he in fact would dispatch a Child Protective Services investigator to respond to those calls. And so you see, those are the steps that have to be taken in any situation where you believe that a child is in danger. And that's because our authorities here require that. And a police officer is one of the people required to do that, to contact people who investigate those issues. So sitting back taking notes because you think a child is in danger so you can call a parent incompetent and then pay a bunch of your informants with kickbacks to get money and say they're supervising the child and, gee, look, this is a pissy mom. Guess what? You're not qualified to do that, and you don't get to sit back and take notes on an administrative record to do that. So you can walk into a courtroom and argue that if you believe it. There are things that you're supposed to do, and there are things that are done to investigate those accusations that include people that are deemed qualified by the courts to make those determinations and report it to a judge. So just having a bunch of people sit back and say things and take notes on it and, create an administrative record without ever doing anything other than creating an administrative record and surveilling those individuals because you say that you have probable cause to do it, that dog's not going to hunt for you for very long, because there are things that are supposed to happen when those suspicions exist. And to continue to engage in that type of surveillance and monitoring and administrative record development without taking those measures to prove or disprove and seek judicial oversight to protect the child while the child is in fact in danger, that is nothing but accessory to abuse. That is somebody who isn't themselves engaging in the abuse, because they're obviously aware of it and are surveilling it and taking notes on it. And it's not to prevent the child from being abused, because you can't prevent the child from being abused. Even if you had a camera in this room and watched that camera 24 hours a day, I'm in the room with Jake. There's never anybody in this apartment but me, Jake, and Roland. The last time there was a visitor to this apartment was 5 weeks ago when the landlord, Paul, came to fix the broken pipes. Okay? I don't care what the cop says. He or she is not doing anything to prevent me from abusing my son. It never has, and does not ever spend a dime on me or my child. I'm the one that tells my son to get up for school in the morning. I drive him to school. I cook his meals. I buy his clothes. I do his laundry. I make sure he has toilet paper to wipe his ass. I discipline him. Nobody does those things but me. I have custodial care and responsibility and supervisory control of my child. Anybody who says anything different is lying, okay? My son and I have only stepped foot in this apartment on the second floor at 130.5 East Boulevard Street, and my son and I have never stepped foot into any other dwelling on this street. And my son and I have never invited a single person to East Boulevard Street or had any visitors that came to see me and Jake on East Boulevard Street. So anybody who ever came to this street and says that they had contact with me and my son didn't come here based on my invitation or my son's invitation. And my son and I have never had anything to do with any of our neighbors. So that's it. Those are the things that I know, and I'm not even a trained police officer. I'm sure if you asked a trained police officer these types of questions about this situation, it would be ripped to shreds as an illegal investigation. And voyeurism and stalking probably very quickly, especially a lawyer, somebody who specializes in these things. This is nothing but voyeurism and stalking.